Hello there. Today's case will take you to Ontario, a province in Canada. Ontario is the most populous province in Canada and is known for its abundant water resources, including many famous rivers and lakes such as the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes, Superior, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. It also boasts beautiful waterfalls like Niagara Falls. South of Ontario is the city of Toronto, the second largest financial center in North America. To the west of the city lies a region called Carleton, renowned for its lush forests, fresh air, and rich resources. Just about an hour's drive from downtown Toronto. This area is a popular destination for tourists looking to relax during the holidays. However, today's horrific murder case took place in this very tourist hotspot. So what exactly happened? Let's find out together right now. On April 13, 1992, Susan's family hosted their annual maple syrup party. Every year on this date, Susan would invite friends and family to their farm in Carleton to enjoy the sweet taste of maple syrup. The farm in Carleton was an inheritance from Susan's father. Her parents had 2 children, she was the eldest, and she had a younger brother named Ian, with whom she had a close relationship. Susan grew up, got married, and lived with her husband Olivier. They had a son named Jamie. Although Jamie was now an adult living independently in Toronto, he maintained a good and close relationship with his parents and his uncle Ian. Ian and his wife Nancy also lived together. Though they had no children, they had a pet cat. Normally, Susan and Ian lived in Toronto, but they regularly went to the farm in Carleton for relaxation. The siblings' houses were quite close to each other, and they frequently visited each other, having each other's house keys. On the day of the maple syrup party at the Carleton farm, Susan woke up early to prepare. As the night fell, more and more guests arrived. But strangely, Ian and his wife Nancy were nowhere to be seen. It wasn't just today. Susan hadn't seen Ian for several days. A few days before, Susan and her husband, Olivia, had seen Ian's car parked near the small house on the farm, so they assumed Ian had come from Toronto. But after 2-3 days without seeing Ian, they began to worry. So Susan and her husband used their spare key to enter Ian's small house on the farm. Entering the house and moving to the bedroom on the first floor, they saw 2 neatly packed bags filled with Nancy's clothes. It seemed like the couple had prepared to attend the party. But Ian was not in the house, and Susan and her husband thought that he and Nancy had gone out for some reason. However, on the day of the party, Ian and Nancy still hadn't appeared. Normally, if they couldn't attend, Ian and Nancy would let them know in advance. But this time, there was no word from them. This made Susan very worried. She called Ian multiple times but got no answer. She even contacted Ian's friends, but no one knew where he was. Nancy, Ian's wife, suffered from lupus erythematosus, a chronic disease with many flare-ups, causing red rashes on her face. There is no cure for this disease, and especially in winter or cold weather, Nancy could not go outside. Although it was April, the temperature in Carleton was still quite low, so Ian and Nancy didn't usually go to the farm during this season. However, despite the cold, they always attended the Maple Syrup Festival every year. This time was clearly an exception, and Susan couldn't understand why they missed the festival. She thought that if her brother and his wife weren't in Carleton, they might still be in Toronto. So Susan called her son Jamie in Toronto, hoping he could check on them. Following his mother's instructions, Jamie went to the house in Toronto where his Uncle Ian and Aunt Nancy lived. He found the front door locked and all the lights off inside. Nancy's Chevrolet was parked in its usual spot. However, Jamie quickly noticed that there were many newspapers and letters outside, untouched, as if no one had been home to collect them for several days. When Jamie entered the house, he found Nancy's handbag wide open on the bed in the bedroom. After checking the room, he called his parents to report back. Susan and Olivier felt that something was very unusual since Nancy would never leave her handbag open like that. Ian's family had a pet cat, and they would usually take it with them if they went away. Susan and Olivier asked Jamie to check if the cat was at home, because if it was, it would mean Ian and Nancy hadn't gone far. Jamie went back into the house and found the cat in the basement. The cat seemed to have been neglected for several days and meowed constantly upon seeing Jamie, clearly very hungry. At this point, Jamie began to feel a rising sense of fear. After feeding the cat, Jamie continued searching and found Nancy's spare car key. He decided to check Nancy's Chevrolet. Inside the car, he found a pile of tissues with bloodstains on the driver's seat, and there was a strange odor emanating from the vehicle. His worry deepened, and he opened the trunk, only to be horrified by the sight before him: his Uncle Ian and Aunt Nancy lying motionless, long since deceased. Jamie now understood the gravity of the situation and immediately called the police. He then had to deliver the heartbreaking news to his parents in Carlton. The Toronto police quickly arrived at the scene. After securing the area, they began their investigation. Strangely, Nancy's body was found unclothed, while her husband was fully dressed. The coroner examined both bodies and found that Ian had injuries from a blunt force and bruises on his neck, wrists, and ankles, indicating he had been tied up. Deep bruises on his shoulders suggested he had been restrained before his death. Nancy had similar blunt force injuries on her neck, with bruises on her wrists, thighs, and knees, and a bruise on the right side of her face. Both had died from suffocation and had been dead for at least 5 days before being found. Ian's wallet was in his pocket, containing his ID and credit cards, but no cash. The house was neat and tidy, with no signs of a struggle or ransacking. Nancy's handbag was open on the bed, and although some money seemed to be missing, it wasn't much. The police found no other unusual clues in the house. The police decided to start by investigating the victim's social connections. Ian, 55, worked in real estate, a busy and high-pressure job. 4 days before the incident, on April 7th, Ian had planned to drive to the small house on the farm in Carlton to rest for a day. He had informed his colleagues of this plan, but no one had seen him since. Although no one had seen Ian at the farm, Susan, Olivier, and local residents in Carlton had all seen his car parked outside the house, believing Ian had recently been there. Nancy, 49, was a nurse who often worked at schools in Toronto and volunteered at homeless shelters. She knew her husband was planning to go to the farm, but expected him to return home by the end of the day. However, by evening, Ian had not returned, and Nancy shared her worries with friends. At 7:36 p.m. on the same day, a call was made from the farm in Carlton to Nancy's house in Toronto, lasting 3 minutes. After that day, neither of them went to work, and their friends and colleagues couldn't contact them. At this point, the police confirmed that the last sighting of Ian and Nancy was 6 days prior, on April 7th. The police checked Ian's farmhouse in Carlton. The front door, a simple wooden one with a lock, showed no signs of forced entry, but the bedroom window appeared to have been pried open. The suspect likely entered through the window. Inside, the house was tidy, with a few empty beer cans in the kitchen and no signs of a struggle. On the stairs leading to the second floor, the police found some blood samples, which were sent to the Toronto Forensic Lab. The results showed the blood belonged to Nancy, indicating she was likely murdered there, but no other clues were found. Near the farm, investigators discovered an octagonal barn built in 1894, featuring a unique architectural style. Next to the barn was a kitchen, formerly used for storing grains. This type of barn was popular due to its practicality in agriculture, combined with religious beliefs. People believed that octagonal barns lacked dark corners where evil spirits could hide. Nowadays, these barns are no longer used for grain storage, often abandoned and becoming ideal hideouts for criminals. Therefore, the police conducted a thorough search in the barn, but found nothing unusual. Why did the couple die at the same time? One theory suggested that Nancy had an extramarital affair, and her lover, knowing Ian would be at the farm, broke in through the window to kill him. However, when Nancy arrived looking for her husband, the assailant killed her as well. Upon investigation, police learned that Ian and Nancy had been married for nearly 25 years and had a very good relationship, considered a loving couple with a happy marriage. The police checked Nancy's communication history, but found no evidence of an affair. The crime scene investigation revealed that the perpetrator left almost no traces. After a week of no progress, the police invited a criminal profiler, Kate Lanes, to join the investigation. She had trained at the FBI Academy, and this was one of her first field cases. When Kate arrived at the Carlton farm, she carefully observed the scene and found nothing unusual. The house was tidy, with no signs of a struggle. She believed the perpetrator had quickly subdued Ian. Next, Kate examined Nancy's Chevrolet, where Ian and Nancy's bodies were found. She noticed the driver's seat was pushed back, indicating that the last person to drive the car was taller than Nancy. Kate then analyzed the state of the victims' bodies and the killer's methods. Both had strangulation marks, but the locations differed. The man's hands and feet were tied, with significant injuries on his right wrist and thigh. Kate assessed that his wounds were deeper, suggesting he had been brutally tortured while alive. Considering Nancy's condition and injuries, she deduced that the perpetrator had inflicted severe pain on her. From the wounds, Kate inferred that Nancy suffered more and was likely the primary target, with the motive being sexual in nature. Kate also deduced several other characteristics of the killer. He was strong enough to move the bodies into the trunk, leading her to believe he was a young, healthy man between 35 and 45 years old. Given Nancy's friendly nature and lack of known enemies, Kate thought the murderer was likely a stranger. Because he left few traces and the house was tidy, Kate concluded this was a carefully planned crime. The killer might have been hiding around Carlton for some time. She predicted he did not have a stable job and was likely to reoffend. Additionally, based on similar cases, Kate characterized the killer as antisocial, eccentric, quiet, and secretive, but capable of communication when necessary. He likely had a poor appearance, neglected personal hygiene, and might have a criminal record. Kate speculated that on the day of the incident, the killer saw Ian's car arrive at the house in Carlton. He used force to subdue Ian and coerced him into calling his wife in Toronto, telling her that he had changed his mind and would be staying at the house for the night. Afterward, he killed Ian in the house and placed his body in the trunk of the car. For some unknown reason, the killer then forced a driver to take the Chevrolet back to the house in Toronto. Kate concluded that this killer was very dangerous, with a tendency to brutally torture his victims, causing both physical and mental pain. It was highly likely that he would reoffend, and future victims would suffer a fate similar to that of Ian and his wife. Thanks to the collected evidence, the police identified several characteristics of the suspect. In a ditch about 100 meters from the house in Carlton, they found a trash bin containing an empty beer can, similar to the empty cans found in the house. There were also some old newspaper clippings, dated 4 months before the incident, and several handwritten pages about military equipment such as weapons, tanks, and ships. Before the murder, the area had multiple warnings about thefts. Since the weather was cold, residents tended to leave the farm and flock to the city to avoid the cold, leading to rumors of a thief sneaking into empty houses to steal jewelry and clothes, but who had not been caught and left no clues. This thief was nicknamed the Hermit. The Hermit had a distinct characteristic. He would leave paper or plastic bags containing feces, along with numerous handwritten pages listing military equipment, at any house he visited. The items found in the ditch outside the barn closely matched those left by the Hermit in other burglary scenes, including the handwriting on the military equipment lists. Therefore, the police believed that the person who killed Ian and Nancy was the Hermit, the burglar terrorizing the town. However, the Hermit was not always smooth and professional in his crimes. Due to the frequent reports of thefts, many Carlton homeowners were worried about their houses being burglarized, leading them to frequently return to Carlton to check on their properties. On one occasion, the Hermit was about to break into a house when he was caught by the returning homeowner. The Hermit quickly used a weapon to threaten the homeowner and forced him to drive him away. On the way to Toronto, the Hermit told the homeowner that he was being prosecuted for various frauds. This homeowner was wealthy, owning properties not only in Carlton, but also likely in Toronto. The Hermit demanded the homeowner take him to his house in Toronto to hide for a while, but the homeowner refused. At a busy intersection in downtown Toronto, the homeowner suddenly stopped the car and demanded the Hermit get out. Having no other choice, he fled on foot. Although the police did not know where the Hermit went, they found his fingerprints in the homeowner's house, as he had not had time to clean up the scene. Unfortunately, the Hermit had no prior criminal record, so there was no information to match in the database. Since he was suspected of being involved in the murder of Ian and Nancy, the police reviewed the case files and found that the homeowner's description of the suspect matched Kate's profile, increasing suspicion of the Hermit. The police's urgent task was to find him. They believed that the handwritten military equipment lists could help identify the Hermit, so they made the images of these lists public, hoping someone would provide a lead. Soon after, they received a promising tip. A woman named Allison claimed to know the Hermit's identity. His name was David. Although David had piercing blue eyes and seemed somewhat shy, Allison found something indescribably odd and unsettling about him. Most people considered David eccentric. He did not know how to interact with others. Despite living in town, David often disappeared, sometimes for weeks, without telling anyone where he went. Although David was not well regarded by others, He did have a friend, Allison's husband, Darren. They found work together repairing the town's old station and later became business partners, buying an abandoned house and opening an antique shop. David was a quiet man, but after Allison had her first child, she saw a completely different side of him. He loved children, always smiling and willingly helping the couple care for the baby. However, David often disappeared and showed little interest in the shop's business. A year before the incident, he vanished again, and the antique shop fell into financial trouble. David did not tell Allison or her husband why he left or where he went. Their family's financial situation deteriorated, prompting them to go to David's storage unit, where they found valuable items to offset their losses. During this process, they discovered a horrifying secret. He had stored numerous pornographic photos in a thick book about military equipment. The items found in David's storage left a lasting impression on Allison. Therefore, when she read the news about Ian and Nancy's case, she recognized crucial clues and informed the police. After investigating, the police found that David was wanted for fraud and was currently on the run. They matched David's fingerprints with those collected at the scenes of the thefts, confirming that David was the perpetrator of the break-ins and burglaries in the town. Given his connection to the murder case, the police searched David's residence. There, they found a lot of pornographic material and 2 photos of an octagonal barn on a farm, a unique architectural relic still standing in Ontario. Allison recalled that David had often bragged about these photos and seemed to have a particular fondness for the place. The police believed that David was familiar with the area around the barn and had visited it multiple times, planning his crimes against nearby victims. Just when the manhunt for David seemed to be at an impasse, the police received a fortunate lead about a suspect wanted in North Vancouver, British Columbia. After a month of searching across Ontario, the police finally found a lead on David. One day, Ontario police saw a news report about North Vancouver police in British Columbia looking for a suspect. A patrolling officer at Mount Seymour had found a man tying 2 women to a tree. When he saw the police approaching, the man fled immediately. The 2 women who had been kidnapped from their workplace said they had been beaten repeatedly by the man. He had forced one of them to drive up the mountain before tying them both to a tree. If not for the police's timely arrival, they might not have survived. North Vancouver police were actively searching for this man. They found some of his belongings in the victim's car, which would become crucial evidence in identifying him. Through this news, Ontario police realized that the items left by the man resembled those stolen by David, also known as the Hermit. The method of tying the 2 victims was similar to the way Ian and Nancy had been treated, leading them to believe the perpetrator was David. From Ontario to distant British Columbia, the police checked major transportation routes since the incident. Finally, a ticket clerk at the Toronto train station recognized David's picture, stating that he seemed very hurried and unfriendly when he bought a ticket under the name David Wilson. Thanks to the ticket clerk's testimony, the police were almost certain that David had fled to British Columbia and was the same person North Vancouver police were looking for. As criminal psychologist Kate had described, David would not stop but continue to commit crimes, so the police had to quickly apprehend him to prevent further atrocities. In the early morning of July 12th that year, 3 months after the incident, Vancouver police received a call from a local restaurant. Someone reported that a man had attempted to strangle a 53-year-old female employee with wire. The restaurant's security had intervened in time to save her. Upon receiving the report, the police arrived at the scene and found the man trying to escape was David, the one they had been searching for. They officially arrested David. Notably, criminal psychologist Kate had described 25 characteristics of the perpetrator, and 23 matched David, particularly his age and motives. In the North Vancouver case, the victims were also treated brutally, indicating that David had a perverse sexual mindset. 5 years after the incident, the case of Ian and Nancy in Toronto went to trial, and David Wilson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Additionally, David was charged with 22 other crimes, including robbery, kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and sexual assault. In 2008, 11 years after his conviction, David attacked another inmate and threatened to kill him, resulting in additional charges. A year later, Canadian prison authorities deemed David too dangerous to be released and stated that before transferring him to a lower security facility, he must demonstrate good behavior while in prison. Now, at 68 years old, David remains behind bars. While the case is closed and the perpetrator punished, does a life sentence seem too lenient for his crimes? What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.